The smell of oak and iron filled Grace Vaughn's lungs as she hammered another steel band around the barrel stave. Her father lying 3 days dead in the ground and creditors already circling like vultures over the cooperage that bore his name. She had turned 18 just 2 months before her father's heart gave out, leaving her alone in Hamilton, Montana territory, in the summer of 1878 with nothing but calloused hands, a workshop full of half-finished barrels, and a determination that burned hotter than the forge she now stoked. The town stretched along the Bitterroot River, a collection of wooden buildings and false-fronted stores that served the ranchers, miners, and drifters who passed through seeking fortune or escape. Grace had known no other home, had grown up breathing sawdust and learning the ancient craft of barrel-making at her father's side since she could first lift a hammer. "Miss Vaughn, I am afraid I must insist on payment within the week." The banker, Mr. Pemberton, stood in the doorway of the workshop, his city clothes already gathering dust from the Montana wind. "Your father's debts do not disappear simply because he has passed." Grace set down her hammer, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Her dark hair, pinned severely back, had come loose in waves around her face. "Mr. Pemberton, I have 3 orders to complete by Friday. The mercantile needs storage barrels, the saloon needs whiskey casks, and the new ranch outside town needs water barrels. When I deliver those, I will have your money. A girl cannot run a cooperage." His tone suggested this was simple fact like gravity or death. "This girl can." Grace met his eyes without flinching. "My father taught me every step. I can select timber, shape staves, char interiors, set hoops. I can make a barrel that will not leak a single drop in 20 years. Pemberton's expression softened slightly, though doubt remained etched in the lines around his mouth. "Very well. 1 week, Miss Vaughn, but if payment is not forthcoming, I will have no choice but to seize the property." When he left, Grace allowed herself one moment of fear, letting it wash through her like cold water. Then she picked up her hammer and returned to work. The barrel before her needed 6 more hoops, careful placement to ensure the staves held true. Her father had always said that coopering was an art of compression and trust, wood and metal working together to create something stronger than either alone. She thought of him as she worked, his patient hands guiding hers when she was small, his quiet pride when she completed her first barrel at 14, his final words from his sick, "You are strong enough, Grace, stronger than you know." The sun had shifted considerably when she heard the horse outside. Grace looked up to find a man dismounting, tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of sage. He moved with the easy grace of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than on his feet, and he wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy, his hat showing the honest wear of weather and work. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, old enough to have seen some life but young enough to still carry hope in his bearing. "Afternoon," he said, removing his hat as he approached. "Name is Ryder Walsh. I work at the 3-Bar Ranch about 10 miles northwest. Boss sent me to check on the water barrels we ordered. Grace Vaughn. They will be ready by Friday as promised." He nodded, his eyes taking in the workshop with clear appreciation. "You do all this yourself?" "My father passed recently. But yes, I do it myself now." Something shifted in Ryder's expression, sympathy without pity. "My condolences. I lost my own father some years back. It is a hard thing." Grace found herself studying him more carefully. There was honesty in his face, a straightforwardness she recognized from people who worked with their hands and kept their word. "Would you like to see the barrels? The wood is already shaped and assembled. I am just setting the final hoops today." "I would, thank you." She led him to where 3 large barrels stood in various stages of completion. Ryder ran his hands over the wood with the careful attention of someone who understood craftsmanship, checking the joints, testing the solidity of the construction. "These are fine barrels, Miss Vaughn. Better than fine. The ranch has been having trouble with leaking barrels from a supplier in Missoula. Boss will be pleased with these." "A barrel is only as good as its tightest joint," Grace said, echoing her father's teaching. "Water will find any weakness. Rather like life in that regard." Ryder's smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in a way that suggested he smiled often. "Miss Vaughn, would you mind if I asked a forward question?" Grace tensed slightly. "You may ask. You need any help with deliveries? I notice you have a wagon but no horse in the stable. The ranch could loan you a team Friday morning, and I could drive them if you need. No charge, just wanting to ensure the barrels arrive safely." The offer surprised her. In the 3 days since her father's funeral, most people had offered sympathy. Some had offered to buy the business for a fraction of its worth, but no one had simply offered help. "Why would you do that?" Ryder considered the question seriously. "Because good work deserves respect, and because trying to do everything alone is a quick path to breaking. I learned that the hard way." Something in Grace's chest loosened slightly, a knot she had not realized she was holding. "I would appreciate that, Mr. Walsh. Thank you." "Ryder, please." "Mr. Walsh was my father. Then call me Grace." He settled his hat back on his head, preparing to leave. "I will be here Friday morning early. We can load the barrels and make the deliveries together." After he left, Grace worked until the light failed, then worked longer by lamplight. But for the first time since her father's death, the loneliness felt less crushing, the future less impossible. She thought of Ryder's hands on the barrel wood, the competence in his touch, the kindness in his offer of help. Then she shook her head and returned to work. There was no time for such thoughts, not with a business to save and a life to build from the ruins of grief. Friday morning arrived with a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Grace had been up since before dawn, loading her wagon with the completed barrels, each one inspected 3 times to ensure perfection. She wore her best dress, still practical cotton but without the workshop stains, her hair properly pinned beneath a bonnet. When Ryder arrived with a team of horses, he too had cleaned up, though he remained dressed for work rather than show. "Morning," he said, his smile as warm as the rising sun. Ready to deliver some barrels, together they hitched the team, working in surprising synchronization. Grace directed the placement of the barrels in the wagon bed, ensuring weight distribution, while Ryder secured everything with rope, his knots precise and professional. The first stop was the mercantile, where Mr. Hendricks inspected the storage barrels with satisfaction and paid Grace the agreed-upon sum without question. The second stop was the saloon, where the owner, a weathered woman named Margaret who had known Grace's father, pressed an extra $1 into her hand and told her she was proud of her. The final delivery took them out of town, following a wagon road through rolling grasslands dotted with pine. Ryder drove with easy competence, and Grace found herself relaxing for the first time in days, letting the rhythm of the wagon and the beauty of the landscape work their subtle magic on her exhausted spirit. "Tell me about the cooperage," Ryder said after a while. "How did your father come to the trade?" Grace settled back against the wagon seat, grateful for the question. "His father was a cooper in Pennsylvania, and his father before that. When my father decided to come west after my mother died, he brought his tools and his knowledge. Said people needed barrels everywhere, that good craftsmanship would always find a market. He was right about that, and he taught you everything, everything. I was all he had after my mother passed when I was small. Some people thought it strange, a man teaching his daughter a trade meant for sons, but my father did not care what people thought. He said skill has no gender, only dedication. Ryder glanced at her with clear approval. Wise man, how long has he been gone? 9 days now. Sometimes it feels like 9 years, other times like 9 minutes. Grace's voice caught slightly. I keep expecting him to walk into the workshop to correct my technique or praise my progress. The silence is the hardest part. I know that silence. Ryder's hands tightened slightly on the reins. My father died 5 years ago back in Texas. Riding accident. He was a rancher, ran cattle near San Antonio. After he died, my mother could not afford to keep the ranch. She moved back east to live with her sister, but I wanted to stay out here. Worked my way north, learned more about cattle and horses, eventually landed at the 3 Bar. Mr. Morrison, the owner, he gave me a chance when I needed one. Do you miss it? Your family's ranch, every day. But missing something and being able to do something about it are different matters. I am saving money, learning everything I can. Someday I will have my own place again. They crested a hill, and the 3 Bar ranch spread out before them, a collection of sturdy buildings clustered around a main house, with corrals and pastures extending in every direction. Cattle dotted the landscape like scattered coffee beans, and Grace could see several riders working in the distance. Ryder guided the wagon toward the main complex, where a gray-haired man emerged from the house, his bearing suggesting authority tempered with fairness. That is Mr. Morrison, Ryder said quietly. Good man, honest boss. They spent the next hour unloading the water barrels, positioning them according to Mr. Morrison's directions. The ranch owner inspected each barrel personally, his weathered hands checking the same points Ryder had examined days earlier. When he finished, he nodded with satisfaction. Fine work, Miss Vaughn. Your father would be proud. He paid her in gold coin, the weight of it solid and real in her hand. I will be needing more barrels come autumn. Can I count on you? Yes, sir. Just send word of what you need. I will do that. He turned to Ryder. Walsh, why do you not show Miss Vaughn around a bit? The boys have the afternoon work well in hand. Ryder glanced at Grace with a question in his eyes. She found herself nodding before she quite realized she meant to. I would like that. The ranch tour revealed the full scope of the 3 Bar operation. Ryder showed her the horse corrals where young colts learned their first lessons, the cattle pens where calves were sorted and marked, the bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived, and the vast stretches of grazing land that seemed to extend forever beneath the endless Montana sky. He spoke with pride about the work, the seasonal rhythms, the challenges of weather and market, and the constant threat of disease or predators. It is hard work, he said as they walked along a fence line, the wagon left behind at the main house. Dawn to dusk most days, sometimes longer during calving season or roundup. But there is something about it, working with animals and land, being part of something bigger than yourself. I understand that, Grace said. It is how I feel about coopering. Each barrel is a small thing, but together they help people store food, transport goods, build their lives. There is satisfaction in creating something useful with your own hands. They stopped at a high point overlooking a valley where cattle grazed peacefully. The afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, and Grace felt something shift inside her, a recognition that this moment mattered somehow, that standing here with this man who understood work and loss and hope was significant in ways she could not yet name. Grace, Ryder said, his voice careful. I know it is not my place and you can tell me to mind my business if you want, but are you doing all right? Really all right? The question, so simply and honestly asked, nearly undid her. She had held herself together through her father's final days. threw the funeral where the whole town came to pay respects, but then left her alone, through 3 days of exhausting work and fear and determination. Now, with this near stranger who somehow felt like something more, the careful control wavered. "No," she admitted quietly. "I am terrified. The banker gave me 1 week to pay my father's debts, and I made enough today to cover it with a little left over. But next month there will be more bills, more debts, more people assuming I will fail. I am good at coopering, truly good, but I am one person trying to do the work of two. And I am so tired, Ryder, so very tired." He turned to face her fully, his sage-colored eyes serious and kind. "Then let me help you. You already helped with the deliveries. I mean more than that. Let me help in the evenings after ranch work or on Sundays when I have time off. I am handy enough with tools and I am strong for lifting and hauling. You can teach me the basics of coopering and I can take some of the burden off your shoulders." Grace stared at him, searching for the angle, the expectation, the cost that surely accompanied such an offer. "Why would you do that?" "Because I see myself in you," Ryder said simply. "When my father died and we lost the ranch, I felt like I was drowning. The only thing that saved me was other people offering help when I was too proud or too stubborn to ask for it. A rancher who gave me work when I had no experience. A family who fed me when I had no money. A bunkmate who taught me to rope cattle when I did not know one end of a lasso from the other. Let me pay forward what was given to me. I cannot pay you. I am not asking for payment. I am asking you to let me help." Grace felt tears threaten, but she blinked them back. "All right. Yes. Thank you." His smile could have lit the valley. "Good. I will come by Sunday afternoon and you can show me what needs doing." The ride back to Hamilton felt different from the journey out. They talked easily, sharing stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Ryder described growing up on a Texas ranch, learning to ride before he could properly walk, helping his father with roundups and brandings. Grace told him about learning letters from her father between lessons in woodworking, about the traveling teacher who came through Hamilton twice a year, and praised her quick mind, about the books she read by lamplight in the evening, stories of places far beyond Montana territory. "Do you want to leave?" Ryder asked. "Go to those places you read about?" Grace considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I think I do. But then I walk into the workshop and smell the wood and see the tools my grandfather used and my father after him, and I realize I am already where I am supposed to be. The world is wide, but my world is here. I understand that. Texas is in my blood, but Montana has gotten into my bones. Different land, different sky, but same feeling of rightness." By the time they reached Hamilton, the sun hung low and orange on the horizon. Ryder helped Grace unhitch the team and store the wagon, his presence making the familiar tasks feel less like drudgery and more like partnership. When they finished, he lingered by his horse, seeming reluctant to leave. "Sunday then?" he asked. "Sunday, I will be in the workshop." He mounted smoothly, settling into the saddle with the unconscious grace of long practice. "Grace, thank you for today. It was nice, having someone to talk to. Most of the ranch hands are good men, but they are not much for conversation beyond cattle and cards. I enjoyed it too, more than I expected to." She watched him ride away into the gathering dusk, then stood in the doorway of her workshop for a long moment, feeling something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or possibility, or maybe just the simple warmth of knowing she was not quite so alone anymore. The days until Sunday passed in a blur of work. Grace completed 2 rush orders for pickle barrels, repaired a damaged whiskey cask for the saloon, and began cutting staves for a new order from a farmer who wanted apple cider barrels for the fall harvest. She worked until her hands ached, and her back screamed protest. But the physical labor helped quiet the grief that still ambushed her at unexpected moments. Seeing her father's favorite chisel, or hearing a sound that reminded her of his laugh. Pemberton returned on Saturday, and Grace paid him with money to spare. The satisfaction of seeing his surprised expression almost worth the exhaustion of earning it. He left without the property seizure notice, and Grace allowed herself a moment of victory before returning to the endless demands of keeping the business alive. Sunday arrived with scattered clouds and the promise of rain later. Grace had just finished arranging tools when Ryder appeared, leading his horse and carrying a basket that smelled suspiciously of fresh bread. "Morning," he said, that easy smile in place. "Mrs. Morrison sent this. She heard I was coming to help you and insisted I bring food. She is convinced everyone in Montana is starving unless she personally feeds them." Grace accepted the basket with genuine gratitude. She had been subsisting on hard cheese and stale bread, too exhausted to properly cook. "Tell her thank you, that was kind." "I will. Now, where do we start?" Grace had given this considerable thought. Teaching coopering took years, but there were tasks that required strength more than skill, work she struggled with alone. "I need to move timber. There is a delivery of oak staves in the back that need to be brought into the workshop and sorted by size. Then there is a barrel I am making for water storage that needs its hoop set, which requires hands to hold while I hammer. I can do that." They worked steadily through the morning, Ryder following Grace's instructions with careful attention. He asked questions when he did not understand, admitted when he made mistakes, and showed a willingness to learn that impressed her. The work went faster with 2 sets of hands, and Grace found herself relaxing into easy conversation between tasks. "Tell me about growing up here," Ryder said as they maneuvered a particularly heavy piece of timber. "What was Hamilton like when you were small?" "Smaller, Wilder. More mining traffic, more people passing through on their way to somewhere else. My father used to say Hamilton was a town of people looking for fortune, and we were the people who helped them store it when they found it." Grace guided the timber into place, checking it for straightness. "There was a big fire when I was 10, burned down half the main street. People rebuilt, but it changed the town, made people realize they were not just passing through anymore, that this was home." "Were you afraid during the fire?" "Terrified. My father grabbed me and we ran to the river with everyone else. Watched the flames from across the water, not knowing if we would have a home to return to. The workshop survived, but many people lost everything. That was when my father really built his reputation. He worked for weeks making barrels for people to store their salvaged goods, did not charge for his labor, only materials. People remembered that." Ryder straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Sounds like a good man. The best." Grace's voice caught slightly. "I hope I can live up to his example." "I think you already are." The simple confidence in his words warmed her more than the summer sun. They broke for lunch, sitting on the workshop steps and sharing the contents of Mrs. Morrison's basket. Fresh bread, cold chicken, apples, and even a jar of preserves. Grace could not remember the last time she had eaten so well. "Mrs. Morrison must think you are bringing food to an army," she said, eyeing the generous portions. "She knows I eat like one. Ranch work builds an appetite." Ryder bit into an apple, the crunch loud in the quiet afternoon. "Can I ask you something personal?" Grace tensed slightly. "You can ask. Do you have other family? Anyone who could help with the business?" "No, my mother died when I was 4. My father had a brother back east, but they had not spoken in years, some quarrel over inheritance. I sent him a letter about my father's death, but I do not expect a response." She plucked at her skirt, smoothing imaginary wrinkles. "It is just me now. Not entirely just you. You have friends in town, surely? Acquaintances, mostly. My father kept to himself after my mother died, focused on work and raising me. I learned the same patterns. Besides, being a woman in a man's trade makes people uncomfortable. The women in town do not quite know what to make of me, and the men either think I am peculiar or view me as competition. Their loss. Ryder's tone held conviction. You are doing something remarkable, Grace. Building a life on your own terms, refusing to let other people's opinions define your limits. That takes courage most people never find. Grace met his eyes, saw nothing but honest admiration there, and felt something flutter in her chest. Why are you so kind to me? You barely know me. Maybe I want to know you better. The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. If that is something you might want to. Grace knew she should be cautious, should protect her heart when everything else in her life felt so fragile. But looking at Ryder, seeing the hope and uncertainty in his expression, she found she was tired of being careful, tired of facing everything alone. I think I might want that. His smile was sunrise breaking over mountains. Good. That is real good. They returned to work with something shifting between them, an acknowledgement of potential. Ryder proved surprisingly adept at holding barrel staves in place while Grace hammered hoops, his steady hands and patient focus making the work easier. By late afternoon, they had completed 2 barrels and made significant progress on a third. You are a natural at this, Grace said, inspecting a joint Ryder had helped her set. Are you certain you want to be a cowboy? I want to be a rancher, which requires being a cowboy first. But I admit, there is something satisfying about this work, seeing something take shape under your hands, knowing it will last and be useful. That is exactly how my father described it. Grace set down her hammer, stretching her sore shoulders. Thank you for today, Ryder. You helped more than you know. Can I come back next Sunday, and maybe some evenings during the week if the ranch work finishes early enough? I would like that very much. As the weeks passed into months, a pattern emerged. Ryder came every Sunday without fail, and most weeks managed at least one evening visit as well. He learned coopering with steady dedication, his initial clumsiness giving way to increasing skill. Grace found herself looking forward to his arrivals, the workshop feeling less empty and lonely with his presence, his conversation and laughter making even the hardest work more bearable. August heat gave way to September cool. The aspen trees in the surrounding mountains turned gold, and the quality of light shifted to autumn clarity. Grace's business stabilized, her reputation for quality work bringing steady orders that kept her busy, but no longer desperate. She paid her bills on time, began rebuilding her father's depleted savings, and even hired a local boy to help with timber deliveries and heavy lifting on days when Ryder was at the ranch. But it was Ryder's presence she treasured most. They talked about everything. Books Grace had read and Ryder wanted to read, places they hoped to see, the small details of daily life that built intimacy through accumulation. Ryder proved to have a dry sense of humor that surprised laughter from Grace at unexpected moments. Grace revealed a passion for star watching, leading Ryder outside on clear nights to point out constellations and share the Greek myths behind their names. You are full of surprises, Ryder said one evening as they stood outside the workshop, heads tilted back to study the spangled sky. Cooper, businesswoman, astronomer. Amateur astronomer at best. My father gave me a book about the stars when I was 12, said it was important to remember the world was bigger than Hamilton, bigger than our worries. Grace pointed to Cassiopeia, the distinctive W shape bright against the darkness. That one is my favorite, a queen who angered the gods with her pride but was beautiful enough to earn immortality. Seems fitting. She glanced at him. Are you saying I am proud? I am saying you are beautiful." The words came out quietly, weighted with meaning. "And if people remember you 1,000 years from now, it will be because you refuse to let circumstances define you." Grace's breath caught. They had been moving toward this moment for weeks, careful steps that built trust and affection, but hearing him speak it aloud made it real in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. "Ryder, you do not have to say anything. I just wanted you to know." He continued looking at the stars, giving her space, but she saw the tension in his shoulders, the careful control of someone trying not to hope too hard. "I care about you." The words came out small but certain. "More than I meant to, more than is probably wise given everything else in my life. But I do." He turned to face her fully, his sage eyes reflecting starlight. "Nothing about this has to be rushed. We have time." "Do we?" Grace heard her own doubt. "You are saving money for your own ranch, planning for a future that might take you away from Hamilton." "I am tied to this place, to the cooperage and my father's legacy. What kind of future can we build when our paths lead different directions?" "Maybe they do not lead different directions." Ryder reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was calloused from rope and reins, warm and solid against hers. "Maybe we are heading the same place, just taking different roads to get there." "What place is that?" "Home, family, a life built on honest work and people who matter." He squeezed her hand gently. "Grace, I know it is early to speak of such things, and I do not want to presume. But I need you to know that when I think about my future now, about that ranch I am saving for, you are in that picture. If you want to be." Grace felt tears sting her eyes, but they were not entirely sad tears. "I want to be. I am just scared. Everything has been so hard since my father died. I finally feel like I am getting my footing, and the thought of letting myself care for you, of building something else that could be lost, it frightens me." "It frightens me too," Ryder admitted. "Loving someone, letting them matter, it is the bravest thing people do. But I would rather be afraid with you than safe alone. If you are willing to try, I promise to be patient, to respect your work and your independence, to build something with you instead of expecting you to fit into something I have already decided." Standing in the starlight, her hand in his, Grace felt the careful walls she had built around her heart begin to crumble. "I would like to try." He smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise. Then, slowly, carefully, he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, a question and an answer, a promise of patience and possibility. Grace's free hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and she kissed him back with all the hope and fear and longing she had been holding inside. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks. I have wanted you to do that for weeks." They laughed together, the tension breaking into something lighter and warmer. Then they stood together under the stars, hands linked, talking quietly about small things and large dreams until the night grew cold enough to drive them inside. October arrived with frost in the mornings and the first whispers of coming winter. Grace received a large order from a merchant in Missoula, barrels for transporting grain, enough work to keep her busy for weeks, and enough money to ensure financial security through the cold months. Ryder helped every spare moment he could find, his coopering skills now advanced enough to be genuinely useful. They worked side by side in comfortable rhythm, their partnership extending beyond romance into true collaboration. "You should consider taking on an apprentice," Ryder said one Sunday as they worked to set hoops on a particularly large barrel. "Someone you could train properly, who could help full-time." Grace had been thinking the same thing. "I know, the business is growing beyond what one person can handle. but training someone takes time I do not have to spare right now, and I would need to be sure they were serious, that they would not leave after a few months. What about a woman apprentice? There must be girls in Hamilton who would welcome the chance to learn a trade. The suggestion startled her. I had not thought of that, but you might be right. Perhaps after I finish this Missola order I will ask around. That evening, they ate dinner together in Grace's small house behind the workshop, a simple meal of stew and bread that Grace had actually had time to prepare properly. The house showed signs of recent care, small improvements that marked the difference between survival and living. Curtains in the windows, a tablecloth on the table, flowers in a jar despite the lateness of the season. "This is nice," Ryder said, looking around with appreciation. "Feels like a home. It is starting to again. For a while after my father died, it just felt like a place I slept. Now it feels like mine." Grace ladled stew into bowls. "In a good way, if that makes sense." "It does. You are building your life, not just maintaining his." They ate in comfortable quiet, the kind of silence that speaks of ease rather than awkwardness. Through the window, Grace could see the first stars emerging in the darkening sky. When they finished eating, Ryder helped clear the dishes, and they washed them together at the basin, his shoulder bumping companionably against hers. "Grace," Ryder said as he dried the last plate, "Mr. Morrison asked me today if I was courting you officially." Grace's hand stilled in the wash water. "What did you tell him?" "I said I was not certain of the official status, but that my intentions toward you were entirely serious and honorable." He set down the towel and turned to face her. "So I thought I should ask you properly. Grace Vaughn, may I court you with the goal of eventual marriage?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Marriage? Not tomorrow, not even this year necessarily. But I want you to know that is where my heart is heading. I love you, Grace. I think I have since the day I first saw you in that workshop, determined and strong and refusing to give up. I want to build a life with you, whatever that looks like, wherever it takes us." Grace dried her hands carefully, buying time while her thoughts raced. She had known her feelings for Ryder ran deep, but hearing him speak of marriage made it real in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. "I love you too. I think I have for weeks, but was too afraid to say it. But Ryder, I cannot give up the cooperage. It is my father's legacy, my life's work. If you are expecting me to become just a rancher's wife, to abandon everything I have built, I am expecting nothing except what you want to give." He took her hands in his grip warm and sure. "You are a Cooper, Grace. That is part of who you are, and I would never ask you to change it. When I think about our future, I see you with your workshop, making barrels and training apprentices and building your business. I also see you with me building a ranch, raising children if we are blessed with them, growing old together. Those things are not contradictory. How would it even work? You want your own ranch, which means land outside town. The cooperage is here. Then we figure it out. Maybe we find land close enough to Hamilton that you can travel to the workshop. Maybe we build a second workshop at the ranch for smaller projects, and you keep the Hamilton location for major work and training apprentices. Maybe we come up with a solution neither of us has thought of yet. The details can be worked out, Grace. What matters is whether you want to try." Grace looked into his sage-colored eyes and saw nothing but love and certainty. This man who had appeared when she needed help most, who had proven himself through steady action rather than empty words, who loved her enough to want her dreams as much as his own. "Yes, yes, I want to try, and yes, you may court me with the goal of eventual marriage." His smile was incandescent. Then he pulled her close and kissed her with a passion that stole her breath and made her knees weak. Grace wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all her love and hope and determination into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, both flushed and breathless, Ryder laughed with pure joy. "I am going to marry you, Grace Vaughn. Maybe not tomorrow, but someday soon. I am going to hold you to that, Ryder Walsh." The following months brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. Grace hired Sarah, a 16-year-old girl whose family had fallen on hard times, as an apprentice. Sarah proved quick-minded and determined, reminding Grace of herself at that age. Grace taught her the basics of coopering, the careful selection of wood and the precise art of shaping staves, and found satisfaction in passing on knowledge her father had given her. Ryder continued working at the 3 Bar while saving every spare dollar toward his dream of his own ranch. He and Grace became a recognized couple in Hamilton, their courtship the subject of approving nods and occasional gossip. They attended church socials together, walked out on Sunday afternoons, stole kisses in the workshop when Sarah was not around, and built the foundations of a partnership that went far deeper than romance. Winter came hard that year, early snow and bitter cold that tested both the cooperage and the ranch. Grace and Sarah worked in the frozen workshop, their breath misting as they crafted barrels for the spring trade. Ryder arrived whenever weather and ranch duties permitted, often hauling firewood or helping with heavy work that fought against frozen fingers and reluctant tools. "It was not this cold in Texas," Ryder muttered one particularly brutal January day as they huddled near the workshop stove. "Consider it practice for ranch ownership," Grace said, offering him a cup of hot coffee. "Montana winters are part of the package. As long as you are part of the package, I will endure any amount of cold." Sarah looked up from the staves she was smoothing, saw their affectionate exchange, and grinned. "You two are shameless." "Shameless and in love," Ryder agreed cheerfully. February brought a break in the weather and an unexpected opportunity. Mr. Morrison called Ryder into his office one evening, and Ryder returned to Hamilton bursting with news. "A section of land just west of the 3 Bar is being sold," he told Grace, his excitement barely contained. 200 acres, good water, decent grazing, close enough to Hamilton that you could reach the cooperage in an hour with a fast wagon. Morrison is willing to vouch for me with the bank, and I have enough saved for a down payment. Grace set down her hammer, her heart racing. "You are going to buy it. I want to. But not without knowing you are with me, Grace. This is not just my dream anymore, it is ours. Does this work for you? Can you see yourself building a life there?" Grace thought about the workshop in Hamilton, about Sarah learning the trade, about the steady stream of orders that kept them busy and solvent. Then she thought about Ryder, about the life they wanted to build together, about children running through grassland with mountains on the horizon. "Yes. We make it work. I keep the Hamilton workshop, train Sarah to run it most days while I focus on special orders and new apprentices. We build a small workshop at the ranch for repair work and custom pieces. I split my time between both places until Sarah is ready to take over more responsibility." "You have thought about this." "I have thought about little else for months." Grace moved into his arms, resting her head against his chest. "Buy the land, Ryder. Let us start building our future." The land purchase took weeks to finalize, requiring negotiations with the bank and legal paperwork that seemed designed to test patience. But by late March, as the snow melted and the first brave flowers pushed through frozen ground, Ryder Walsh became a landowner. Grace accompanied him on his first visit to the property as its owner, the two of them riding out on a warm spring morning that promised summer's eventual return. The land was beautiful in its stark simplicity, rolling grassland backed by pine-covered hills, with a clear creek running through the southern portion. The previous owner had left a small cabin, weathered but structurally sound, and a barn that needed repairs but had good bones. "It is perfect," Grace breathed, standing on a small rise and surveying the vista. "I can see it, Ryder. The ranch house over there, barns and corrals, cattle in the pastures, our life." "Our life," he echoed. Then he took her hand and led her to a relatively flat spot near the creek. "I think this would be a good spot for a house. Close enough to water, high enough to avoid spring flooding, protected from the worst winter winds by those pines. You have been planning. Every spare moment." He turned to face her, suddenly serious. "Grace, I know we said we would wait, that we had time, but standing here on our land, looking at our future, I do not want to wait any more." He dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside gleamed a simple gold band with a small but perfect sapphire. "This was my grandmother's ring. My mother gave it to me before I left Texas, said to give it to the woman who made me believe in forever. Grace Vaughn, you have done that. Will you marry me? Build this ranch with me, build a life with me, be my partner in all things." Grace felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were purely happy tears. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while they both laughed with joy. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, and Grace kissed him back with all the love and passion and certainty she possessed. "When?" he asked when they finally came up for air. "Soon. Summer. Let us not wait longer than necessary." "Summer, then." "I will marry you as soon as the preacher can arrange it." They set the wedding for late June, allowing enough time to make basic preparations, but not so much time that anticipation became anxiety. Grace worked frantically to complete outstanding barrel orders before the wedding, determined not to leave Sarah overwhelmed. Ryder focused on making the ranch cabin livable, repairing the roof and chinking gaps in the walls, building furniture and installing a proper stove. The Hamilton community rallied around them with surprising warmth. Women who had viewed Grace's coopering with suspicion softened when she became an engaged woman, their prejudice apparently considering marriage adequate excuse for her unconventional trade. Mrs. Morrison took charge of wedding preparations with the efficiency of a military general, organizing food, flowers, and enough seating to accommodate half of Hamilton. Mr. Morrison gave Ryder a week off work, paid, as a wedding gift. Grace found herself welcomed into circles of women previously closed to her, receiving advice on everything from housekeeping to husband management, much of it contradictory and some of it absurd. But she appreciated the gesture, the acceptance she had not realized she craved until it was offered. Sarah proved invaluable during the final weeks, managing the cooperage with increasing competence while Grace focused on wedding preparations and finishing the last commission pieces. "You have taught me well," Sarah said one afternoon, inspecting a barrel she had made almost entirely herself. "I will keep the business running while you are on your honeymoon, and when you come back, we can discuss my taking on more responsibility. You will make an excellent cooper, Sarah. Probably better than me eventually. Maybe. But you gave me the chance when no one else would." "I will not forget that." The wedding day arrived with cloudless skies and perfect weather, as if Montana itself was celebrating. Grace wore a dress of cream silk, practical enough for her life but beautiful in its simplicity, her dark hair pinned up with flowers. Ryder waited at the church in his best clothes, his sun-darkened face serious with emotion until Grace appeared, and then his smile could have lit the entire territory. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged vows before the preacher. The entire town packed into the small church and promised to love, honor, and cherish each other through all the challenges life might bring. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Ryder kissed her, Grace felt something settle into place in her heart, a rightness that made everything they had struggled through worth it. The celebration afterward filled the town square, tables laden with food, musicians playing fiddles and guitars, children running wild while adults danced and laughed and toasted the newlyweds. Grace found herself passed from partner to partner as tradition demanded, dancing with Mr. Morrison and Mr. Pemberton the banker, and a dozen other men whose faces blurred together with exhaustion and happiness. But always her eyes sought Ryder, finding him across the crowd, and his gaze finding hers with a warmth that needed no words. As evening approached, they finally managed to escape, riding out to their ranch in a decorated wagon amid cheering and thrown rice. The cabin waited with lamplight glowing in the windows, simple but clean and ready for them. Ryder carried Grace across the threshold, both of them laughing, and then they were alone at last, the noise and celebration fading into peaceful silence. "Hello, Mrs. Walsh," Ryder said softly, setting her gently down. "Hello, Mr. Walsh. Strange how natural that sounds. Not strange to me, feels like I have been waiting my whole life to say it." They came together in a kiss that deepened and lengthened, hands exploring with new permission. Clothing gradually shed until they stood together in lamplight, bare and vulnerable and perfectly themselves. Ryder lifted Grace and carried her to their bed, laying her down with a tenderness that made her throat tight with emotion. "I love you," he whispered against her skin, kissing her throat, her collarbone lower. "I love you too. Show me." He did, with patience and passion, learning the map of her body as she learned his, the newness of it both awkward and wonderful. They moved together, finding rhythm and connection, and when they finally joined together completely, Grace gasped at the intimacy of it, the vulnerability and trust and overwhelming rightness. They made love slowly, exploring and adjusting, until pleasure built and crested and left them gasping in each other's arms, tangled together in sweat-dampened sheets and complete contentment. Afterward, they lay together in the lamp-lit darkness, Ryder's hand tracing lazy patterns on Grace's bare shoulder while she nestled against his chest. "That was everything," she whispered. "That was just the beginning." He kissed the top of her head. "We have a whole life ahead of us, Grace." Nights like this, and mornings working side by side, and years building something neither of us could build alone. "I know. I cannot wait." They eventually rose and put out the lamps, returning to bed to curl together under quilts, exhaustion and happiness pulling them toward sleep. Grace's last conscious thought was gratitude, for this man who loved her exactly as she was, for the life they would build together, for second chances and new beginnings. The months after the wedding proved challenging in practical ways but deeply satisfying emotionally. Grace divided her time between the Hamilton Cooperative and the ranch, teaching Sarah more advanced techniques while working alongside Ryder to establish the ranch infrastructure. They purchased a small herd of cattle, fixed fences, built corrals, and worked from dawn to dusk, turning raw land into a functioning operation. The physical labor was exhausting, but working together brought a satisfaction that went beyond accomplishment. Ryder proved endlessly patient with Grace's limited ranching knowledge, teaching her about cattle behavior, pasture management, and the 100 small details that determined success or failure. Grace taught him more advanced coopering, and together they built a small workshop behind the cabin where Ryder could make basic repairs and Grace could work on special orders. By autumn, the ranch began to take shape. The cattle thrived on good grazing, the cabin had been expanded into a proper house with multiple rooms, and the barn stood solid and weatherproof against approaching winter. Grace discovered she was pregnant in October, the news bringing joy and terror in equal measure. "We are going to have a baby," she told Ryder one evening, her voice shaking slightly. He dropped the rope he had been coiling and pulled her into his arms. "A baby? Grace, that is wonderful. Are you all right? What do you need?" "I need you to not panic, which you are currently doing." But she was laughing even as she said it, her own fear eased by his obvious joy. "And I need you to understand that I intend to keep working as long as I safely can. Women have been having babies and working for thousands of years. I am not made of glass. I know. But you are precious to me, so you will have to forgive me for being protective." "I can forgive that. Just do not expect me to become helpless. I am still myself, just expanding." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through winter. Grace worked in the cooperage until her growing belly made reaching across barrels impractical, then focused on teaching Sarah and managing business operations. Ryder fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more than necessary, but generally respecting her need for independence and purpose. In March of 1880, their son entered the world during a late-season snowstorm, his first cries competing with wind howling around the cabin. The birth was difficult but not dangerously so, attended by Mrs. Morrison and the local midwife while Ryder paced outside wearing a path in the snow. When he was finally allowed inside to meet his son, the expression on his face made Grace's heart overflow. "He is perfect," Ryder whispered, carefully taking the tiny bundle. "Look at him, Grace. He is absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months without reaching agreement. But now, looking at their son's tiny face, Ryder said, "Thomas, after your father, so he knows where he came from." Grace felt tears slide down her exhausted face. "Thomas Walsh, I love it." "Thomas Cooper Walsh," Ryder amended. Both family trades, both legacies. Baby Thomas proved to be a colicky infant who objected strenuously to sleep, testing their patience and exhaustion limits. But he was theirs, a perfect combination of both parents, and they loved him with a fierceness that surprised them. Grace learned to work with a baby strapped to her back, Beryl making interrupted by nursing and diaper changes. Ryder became adept at soothing Thomas to sleep, walking the cabin floor at 3 in the morning singing half-remembered cowboy songs off-key. Sarah took over more of the Hamilton cooperage operations, her skills now advanced enough to handle all but the most complex work. Grace visited twice a week, teaching Sarah new techniques and maintaining relationships with established customers. But she also found herself increasingly content at the ranch, working in their home workshop and raising Thomas. "I never thought I could be happy away from Hamilton," Grace told Ryder one evening as they sat on their porch, Thomas sleeping peacefully for once. "The cooperage was my whole world for so long. And now my world is bigger. The cooperage is still part of it, still important. But this here with you and Thomas, this is home in a way Hamilton never quite was. I understand that. Texas was home, then Montana, then the 3 Bar, but nowhere felt truly right until I found you." He took her hand, their fingers linking with the ease of long practice. "We built this together, Grace. A life neither of us could have had alone." The ranch prospered over the following years. Ryder proved himself a skilled rancher, and the Walsh herd grew steadily. Grace's barrels remained in high demand throughout the region, her reputation for quality work spreading beyond Hamilton. Sarah eventually bought the Hamilton cooperage, becoming one of the few female business owners in Montana territory, and Grace focused on custom work and training new apprentices at the ranch. Thomas grew from colicky infant to energetic toddler to curious child, learning to ride before he could properly read, helping his father with cattle and his mother in the workshop with equal enthusiasm. In 1882, Grace gave birth to their daughter, Catherine, whose easy temperament proved the opposite of her brother's difficult infancy. 2 years later, another son, James, completed their family. The children grew up learning both trades, Thomas showing particular aptitude for ranching while Catherine surprised everyone with her talent for coopering. James proved interested in both, content to divide his time and learn whatever his parents would teach. Montana achieved statehood in 1889, and Hamilton celebrated with parades and speeches. Ryder and Grace attended with their children, now 9, 7, and 5, watching the festivities with pride for their adopted home. The town had grown considerably since Grace's childhood, less wild but more permanent, a real community rather than a way station. "Remember when we met?" Ryder asked as they stood together watching the parade. "You were so determined, so fierce. I knew immediately you were someone special. I remember thinking you were surprisingly kind for a stranger. Most people offered sympathy or unwanted advice. You offered help without conditions. Best decision I ever made, helping you that day, led me to everything I never knew I wanted." Grace leaned against his shoulder, watching their children chase each other through the crowd, and felt contentment settle deep in her bones. They had built something remarkable together, a life of honest work and deep love, raising children who understood both the value of tradition and the importance of forging their own paths. Years passed in the rhythm of seasons and hard work. The children grew and eventually struck out on their own. Thomas took over the ranch, expanding it with his father's guidance. Catherine opened her own cooperative in Missoula, carrying the family trade to a new generation and a larger market. James became a teacher, using his knowledge of both ranching and coopering to help others learn practical trades. Ryder's hair turned gray, and Grace's hands grew stiff with arthritis, making barrel making more difficult. But they remained active and engaged, now grandparents multiple times over, watching their legacy expand in directions they never could have predicted. On a summer evening in 1905, they sat together on the porch they had built together decades earlier, watching the sun set over land they had turned from wild grass to working ranch. Ryder was 73 now, still strong but moving slower. Grace, at 72, had finally given up regular coopering, her hands no longer able to grip hammer and chisel with necessary precision. "You have any regrets?" Grace asked, a question she had never quite dared voice before. Ryder considered it seriously. "Not major ones. Wish I had kissed you sooner, maybe. Wish I had told you I loved you that first month instead of waiting so long. But the big things, no, you. I wish my father had lived to meet you to see what we built. But otherwise, no. We built something good here, Ryder. A family, a business, a life worth living. Not everyone can say that. No, they cannot." He reached over and took her hand, the gesture so familiar after nearly 30 years of marriage that Grace barely registered it consciously. "Thank you, Grace. For saying yes, for building this with me, for being my partner in everything. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me when I was at my lowest, for offering help when I needed it most, for loving me exactly as I was." They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged overhead, the same stars they had watched together that night so many years ago when they first acknowledged their feelings. The creek burbled peacefully, cattle lowed in the distance, and somewhere in the house behind them a grandchild laughed at something another had said. "It is a good life," Ryder said quietly. "The best," Grace agreed. "The very best." Thomas ran the ranch with his wife and 3 children, continuing the Walsh tradition of honest work and quality cattle. Catherine's cooperative in Missoula had 3 apprentices, All young women who had heard stories of the barrel maker who refused to let gender limit her skill. James taught at the Hamilton School, his classroom filled with students learning practical trades alongside traditional subjects. The grandchildren visited often, filling the ranch house with noise and energy, keeping Ryder and Grace young at heart even as their bodies slowed with age. Grace taught her granddaughters coopering basics in the home workshop, passing on knowledge her father had given her so many decades ago. Ryder took the grandsons out to check cattle, teaching them to read weather and land, to understand animals and respect hard work. Winter of 1907 came harsh and early. Ryder caught a cold that December that settled into his chest and refused to clear. Grace nursed him with fierce determination, but pneumonia set in, and despite the doctor's best efforts, Ryder weakened steadily. On a clear January morning, with Grace holding his hand and their children gathered around, Ryder Walsh died peacefully in the bed he had shared with his wife for nearly 30 years. His last words were, "Thank you for the adventure, Grace. I love you." Grace grieved deeply but without bitterness. They had been blessed with decades together, had built a life and raised a family, had loved each other well and truly. She wore black for a year, but she did not stop living. Thomas ran the ranch, but Grace remained involved, offering advice and helping with decisions. She spent her days with grandchildren, working in the garden, doing small coopering projects her hands could still manage. Sometimes, on clear evenings, she sat on the porch they had built together and looked at the stars, remembering the young cowboy who had offered help to a struggling cooper's daughter, who had seen her strength when others saw only strangeness. She missed him with an ache that never quite faded, but she was grateful too, grateful for every moment they had shared, every challenge they had overcome together, every laugh and kiss and quiet evening watching the sun set over their land. Grace lived another 8 years, long enough to see Thomas's eldest son take over significant ranch responsibilities, long enough to see Catherine expand her cooperative into a major regional supplier, long enough to see James become Hamilton's school principal. She died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1915, at the age of 82, surrounded by the life she and Ryder had built together. Thomas found her that morning, peaceful in her bed, a slight smile on her weathered face. On the nightstand beside her sat an old book about stars, and next to it, a barrel bung that Ryder had carved for her their first year of marriage, marked with their initials and still perfect after all those years. They buried Grace next to Ryder in the small cemetery outside Hamilton, the service attended by what seemed like half of Montana. Former apprentices came to pay respects to the woman who had taught them coopering and independence in equal measure. Ranchers came to honor the woman who had helped build one of the region's most successful cattle operations. Students came to remember the grandmother who had taught them that strength came in many forms, that determination mattered more than gender or circumstance. The headstone was simple. Grace Vaughn Walsh, 1860–1915, Cooper, wife, mother. Built barrels strong, built a life even stronger. The ranch continued through the generations, Walsh cattle bearing the brand Ryder and Grace had designed together. The cooperative traditions passed from mother to daughter, occasionally son, keeping alive the trade that had brought Grace and Ryder together. And in Hamilton, people still told stories about the cooper's daughter who refused to fail, and the cowboy who loved her enough to build a life rather than demand she fit into his. It was a love story written in hard work and determination, in barrels that held water without leaking and cattle that thrived on good grazing, in children raised to value skill and kindness, in a partnership that proved two people building together could create something neither could achieve alone. It was a story without easy answers or simple solutions, but it was real and true and lasting. And perhaps that was the greatest legacy Grace and Ryder left behind. Not just the successful businesses or the prosperous ranch or even the large family, but the proof that love built on respect and partnership, on shared work and mutual support, could endure through any challenge. They had taken their individual strengths and woven them together into something unbreakable, a life that honored both their pasts while building toward a shared future. The barrels Grace made remained in use for decades, her craftsmanship so superior that they outlasted cheaper manufactured alternatives. The ranch Ryder established continued to prosper through depressions and droughts, the foundation he built proving solid enough to support generations. But more than these physical legacies, they left behind an example of what partnership could be, how two people could build something extraordinary without either sacrificing who they were. Thomas, running the ranch his parents built, often told his own children and grandchildren the story of how their grandparents met, how Ryder had offered help without expectation and Grace had accepted with dignity, how they had fallen in love through shared work and mutual respect. He told them about barrels and cattle, about determination and kindness, about the importance of building something worth leaving behind. Catherine, teaching young women the coopering trade in her Missoula workshop, shared her grandmother's story as inspiration, proof that skill and determination mattered more than gender or circumstance. She taught them the technical aspects of barrel making, but she also taught them Grace's lessons about independence and partnership, about finding someone who strengthened rather than diminished you. James, educating children in Hamilton's school, incorporated his parents' story into lessons about Montana history, about the settlement of the West, about the ordinary people who built extraordinary lives through honest work and strong character. His students learned that history was not just famous names and major events, but also everyday people choosing to build rather than surrender, to hope rather than despair. The story of Grace Vaughn and Ryder Walsh became part of Hamilton's collective memory, passed down through generations, adapted and embellished but maintaining its essential truth. The cooper's daughter who built barrels strong, and the cowboy who built a life with her even stronger. A love story without dramatic gestures or grand declarations, but rich with the quiet heroism of choosing partnership, of working toward shared dreams, of building something lasting in a wild and unforgiving land. And on clear Montana evenings, when the stars emerged bright against the darkening sky, those who knew the story might look up at the constellations Grace had loved and remember that sometimes the greatest adventures are the ones we build together. Brick by brick, barrel by barrel, day by ordinary day, until we look back and realize we have created something extraordinary from nothing more than love, work, and determination to make a life worth living. The Cooperage Workshop in Hamilton eventually became a museum, preserved by the town as a historic site. Visitors could see the tools Grace had used, examples of barrels she had crafted, photographs of her and Ryder and their growing family. The ranch remained in family hands, still operating, still raising cattle on the land Ryder and Grace had claimed and cultivated. And in Missoula, Catherine's cooperage continued under new ownership, still training apprentices, still maintaining standards of quality that Grace would have recognized and approved. These physical remnants told part of the story, but the real legacy lived in the people who carried Grace and Ryder's values forward, in the countless individuals who heard their story and found courage to pursue their own unconventional paths, to build partnerships of equality and respect, to remember that the strongest structures are built on foundations of love and mutual support. In the end, Grace and Ryder's story was not about barrel making or ranching, though those elements were important. It was about two people finding each other at the right moment, recognizing something essential in one another, and choosing to build a life together that honored both their individual strengths and their shared dreams. It was about the quiet heroism of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges with determination, grace, and love. The cooper's daughter built barrels strong, using skills passed down through generations, crafted with patience and precision. The cowboy built a life with her even stronger, constructed from love and respect, partnership and shared purpose. Together they proved that the strongest bonds are forged not in easy times but through shared struggle, that the most enduring legacies are built not on grand gestures but on daily choices to work together, to support each other, to build something worth leaving behind. And in the wild territory that became Montana, among the countless stories of survival and success, failure and fortune, their story endured as a testament to what two people could achieve when they chose to build together rather than stand alone.